Hello, Illinois, and welcome to our webinar today titled Responsible Gambling 101 Beyond Brochures and into 2020. My name is Robbie Fuquay, and I will be your host today. And this webinar is brought to you by today, are actually facilitated by Morneau Chappelle and sponsored by the Illinois Department of Human Services. And on behalf of Morneau Chappelle and the Illinois Department of Human Services, we are very excited to announce that we have Julie Hynes, the Executive Director of the Oregon Council on Problem Gambling, as our guest speaker today. She's a certified prevention specialist and considered a subject matter expert on today's topic. But before I get into a little bit about her background and our formal introduction, I would like to make a few announcements regarding our training schedule and then speak on how we'll be facilitating this webinar. First off, we're happy to announce that our website, weknowthefeeling.org, has been updated, and you can go there to check out all of our upcoming training events. And again, that's weknowthefeeling.org, and go under the tab for providers. For is FOR, for providers, and under that tab, you will be able to see and register for all the upcoming webinars that we have and our 4-day core gambling disorder workshops. Now, these workshops are designed to prepare participants for the Illinois PCGC license, while also providing you the all-important educational requirement of those 30 CUs that are intended to be applied to the Illinois PCGC license itself. Now, you can use the CUs for whatever you like, but again, it's intended to be used for that educational requirement. Now, our next workshop will be held in Chicago next week at the UIC campus. I will be conducting that workshop, and unfortunately, it's completely filled up. But the good news is we will be offering 5 more through the end of our fiscal year 2020, ending in June. Now, we are happy to announce, too, that Dr. David Ledgerwood will do the next 4-day workshop starting April 28th. And between Dave and I, we'll be in Springfield twice. Also, we'll be facilitating one in Chicago in May, one in Mount Vernon, and one in Bloomington. So now, while you're on this page, you're also going to see that we have 6 more webinars coming your way that include, if you look at the names, we've got some really great guest speakers like Julie. And our next scheduled webinar after this one will be on February 20th. And unfortunately, you're going to have me presenting. It will be on the history and challenges of gambling in the military. So again, visit weknowthefeeling.org to get all the details on all of these training events. And also you can register through that website as well. So we've tried to make this as easy as we can for everybody to get on. And one more thing before we do get started here, we would like to thank the Illinois Department of Human Services for making these trainings possible, like this one, because they are also the ones that are responsible for bringing all these training events to us at no cost. So thank you, Illinois Department of Human Services. Now, remember, in order to receive your CEU on our webinars, you must be on the call for the entire presentation and participate on all 3 polling questions. Now, you've also probably noticed you're muted. And if you've ever been on a call with background noise, which I think I was on last week, then you'll probably know why you're muted today. In fact, I'm going to mute myself once I turn over the mic to Julie. So if you have questions during the call, just please feel free to chat us, okay? And we'll be checking those chats throughout the call, or I will. I see I've got a chat now, so I'll check on that. Now, we'll make sure to follow up with you via email if we're unable to get to the questions. And when I present, we've got so much information, we haven't been able to get 2 questions, but perhaps let's see how far Julie gets into her call today, and maybe we can open the line for the last few minutes. Maybe so. If not, it's okay. Again, I'll be checking the chats, and I'll follow up with answering these questions to you via email. So now let's go on to our guest speaker, a little bit more about Julie. Again, she's the executive director of the Oregon Council on Problem Gambling. She has focused her work in the problem gambling field since 2002. She's had roles like being the director of responsible gambling with the Massachusetts Council on compulsive gambling. She was the coordinator of Prevention Lane's Problem Gambling Prevention Program, an instructor at the University of Oregon. She was also a co-investigator on the 2016 Problem Gambling Services Survey in the U.S., and she has provided training and technical assistance consultations across the U.S. Now, in 2012, she was honored with the NCPG Wolfing Prevention Award. I hope I pronounced that right, Julie. And she is currently the secretary of the NCPG Board of Directors. And again, she's a certified prevention specialist. And I can tell you the first time I heard Julie speak was at the NCPG conference in 2018, July, back in Cleveland. And she's great. She's funny. She's definitely a subject matter expert in working with young adults, prevention, and gaming. So without further ado, I'm looking forward to hearing this, as I'm sure everybody else is. Julie, you're good
All
to
right.
go.
Thanks so much, Robbie. Thanks for that nice introduction. And I just have to say, I'm not going to be funny on a webinar because telling jokes and to avoid, you can only hear yourself laugh. So I might probably try to avoid that. But anyway, I just want to thank folks for joining us on this call. And yes, thank you for the Illinois Department of Human Services and Morneau Chappelle. I realize that people are probably on their lunch breaks and you have very, very busy schedules. And being on a webinar isn't always the most engaging. So my hope is that you will find yourself coming away with a little bit more knowledge and also engaged in this next hour. And as Robbie said, please do feel free to check in if you have questions along the way. Otherwise, we will definitely leave a little bit of time for questions at the end of the webinar if you have them. So we have 3 quick objectives in this next hour. One is to identify new trends in gambling that are relevant to reducing harm. The second piece is defining responsible gambling as it relates to these new trends. And then the third piece is looking into 3 examples that you can use in your own settings. Now, I know that most of the folks on this call, if not all, are clinicians. And so I'm very mindful of that when coming to prepare for this webinar. I'm coming from that perspective. And so I definitely want this to be useful for you. So diving in, so trends, what are some trends right now that we really need to start focusing on when we're looking at reducing harm in the gambling world? Well, obviously, one of the key pieces here is sports betting. And pretty much, I think it's been on everybody's radar, especially in Illinois, as you looked last year at passing a law about addressing and legalizing sports betting in the state. And I understand that was a very robust law and that there's a lot of controversy around it, but it looks like sometime soon you will be having physical and online sports betting in your state. And that's something that many states are now doing. My state in Oregon, we just passed sports betting this last year, and it is now online where you can gamble on apps. And it's a concern. Dr. Leah Nauer out of Rutgers, New Jersey was one of the first states also to legalize. And what she said was, when you're watching a game and betting during that game, it plays into impulsivity. The more impulsive people are, the higher likelihood that they'll develop gambling problems. So it's definitely a consideration. I think most of us on this call know that the more available something is, the more likely we are to use it, and therefore the more likely we are to have risk. So that's something it's a consideration, and it's something that's important for us to address. And hey, there's Khalil Mack of your Chicago Bears. Well, maybe most people on this call. You'll probably not like me in a few minutes as I show somebody else that's a football player. The little less obvious is the gamification of gambling. So most of it, I mean, everybody on this call knows that sports betting is gambling. It is not a stretch to think that when we are betting online, even looking at fantasy sports, that would be considered gambling in most people's eyes. But there's a lot of gamification that's coming about. And when I say gamification, you can see here, this is a centipede game. And you know, those of us of a certain generation used to play this game and loved it, and it definitely has a certain draw. Now you can also see as people are walking by, that's the SeaTac airport there, that it's a certain low level, and you know, young people are able to access it, and it's a scratch ticket. It looks like a video game, but it's actually a scratch ticket. And then in very, very small letters there, it says must be 18 years old or older to purchase. So these are the kind of things that are happening. The industry knows that people aren't necessarily as drawn to scratch tickets as they used to be. It's not as exciting as it used to be. And therefore they realize that they need to kind of up their game. Now then we take it a little bit further. We take it into apps. So many people obviously are most people on this call probably have a smartphone. If you don't, you're probably a hipster and you've probably gone off the grid and retro cool with your flip phone. But most people have smartphones now, and most people are gaming on them. In fact, games are by far and above the most used and most purchased items within the app world. Now, manufacturers have realized that if they are able to provide a game for free with in-app purchases, they're going to get a lot more money from people. So I told you guys wouldn't like me. This is Jimmy Garoppolo. I've been waiting for decades. You guys are aware, you know, those of you who are Bears fans know how long you've been waiting. And I've been waiting for 25 years for my Niners to win a Super Bowl. So I'm excited about this weekend. But there's Jimmy. He's downloaded Candy Crush. And he's like, yeah, this is cool. This is free. Well, Jimmy starts playing. And after a while, he starts realizing, wow, this game is, it's getting harder to progress in the game. I don't know what to do. It's getting harder and harder to quote unquote level up. And then the game provides me with, hey, you can buy candy and you can level up faster. All you got to do is pay 99 cents. So now he's excited because he's paid a little bit of money and he's bragging to his friends that, yes, I have leveled up on this game and I'm doing better than you. And so the manufacturers have realized that the best way to get people's money is to provide a game for free and then offer what we call these microtransactions. And these microtransactions are indeed our real money, and they provide us with a virtual prize or boost in order to progress in the game. And so Candy Crush, by the way, it earns $2 billion annually. So if you know someone that plays Candy Crush, you know, they may or may not spend any money on it, but if they're not, somebody else is spending a lot for them. And then there's games like Fortnite. Fortnite is, you know, it obviously draws a little bit younger of a crowd, but now Fortnite is a similar type of deal. All these games can provide some kind of incentive if you're able to pay for real money. V-Bucks, which you can find at a kiosk at a grocery store or at Target. Those little gift cards are ways in which people can purchase more money and virtual money, and then they get virtual prizes out of it. These can also be exchanged for real money. We'll talk about that in a moment. Not all of them, not Fortnite, but other games. This is the freemium issue. So the issue with this is that when people are able to play a free game and then it is incentivized with paying real money, it is something that researchers have looked at and said, you know, this is actually more likely that someone who plays these games are then later on likely to move into real gambling. And then the research also shows that they're more likely to also have later gambling problems. And Captain Obvious might show up and say, well, that's pretty apparent that that would be the case, but research kind of tends to confirm what we already believe to be true, and in this case it did. So beyond looking at microtransactions, we also have all of this new world of esports. And those of you who are familiar with esports know what this is all about, and those of you who aren't, esports is just basically it's a way of saying competitive sports. It's competitive video gaming. So in competitive traditional sports, we have our leagues like NFL, NBA, and MLB. And in esports, we have other leagues. So when someone says esports, they're not referring necessarily to an entire genre. They're referring really to one of the leagues or games within the genre. And so if someone says, well, they're going to think about making esports an Olympic sport, they're talking about a specific one of these games that they're thinking about making a sport within the Olympics. And so it's basically competitive video gaming. So these are some examples here: World of Warcraft, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, League of Legends, etc. And the games keep on coming. Apex Legends came out last year and it exploded right away. And so this new wave of esports, this competitive video gaming, has also spawned a wave of sports betting. The National Council on Problem Gambling last year sponsored a study to look at the attitudes and gambling experiences on a national level. Over 3,000 people participated in this. And it was found that of sports bettors, 11% nationwide have bet on esports. So they bet on competitive video games. And that's a significant number. If you think 1 in 10 people who have bet on sports have also bet on esports, that's a number that even in 2019 seems pretty high, and it's only certainly going to be growing as esports popularity grows. So what we know about gaming and gambling convergence is that esports is something that can be directly competed on just like a football game, online betting, just like you would on a sports betting app for football. And there's also fantasy sports. And then we're going to look into loot boxes and skins in just a moment here. Now, I realize the audio may not work here, but here is a link, and I'm definitely open to and happy to send the slide deck later on for anyone interested in this. But this is a link from the UNLV International Gaming Institute. They now have an esports class in which they're really trying to entice and get more people into marketing and developing games that might be interesting to the younger generation. So this is just basically showing what it looks like in this class that they have. And if you're interested in taking this link, it talks about how to draw people into the casinos who really aren't interested in the games that are behind this fella. So, you know, a lot of the games that are already out there, like Wheel of Fortune, you know, they may be for a certain genre. We've now seen Game of Thrones slots and things like that to draw a younger crowd. But I went last year in Boston to an esports gaming talk, and they were really talking about how it is that they can get people into the casino while having a video game kind of experience while still getting their money. Video games kind of tend to take a little bit more time, and video game manufacturers don't want people to take a lot of time. They want to be able to have quick transactions so they can make more money. And so this is still something that's in development, but it is something that we need to pay attention to. Some people on this call may have heard of the loot box or loot crate. It is basically another form of microtransaction or small transaction within a video game or an app. And it could be something that you get that you spend, say, 99 cents on, and you could get a chance, just like you would here with one of our old school grocery store, put a quarter in, hope you get something great, but you probably get a crappy little plastic ring out of. But you could possibly get something really cool. So if you pretend that in that little container that there was a diamond ring, but all of the other things were little plastic rings, that's kind of how a loot box works. You spend real money on it, and you could have a chance of getting something that could really have value. The chances are really low. Most manufacturers have not placed odds on this, and it has been very controversial because youth are able to access it very easily, and it's something that has drawn a lot of attention among people, especially gamers even, who say, I don't want to have to compete with someone who could pay to win, essentially. So this has drawn a lot of competition around gamers themselves, around the competitive nature, as well as the issue about gambling, and as well as youth gambling. It was a target of a FTC, a Federal Trade Commission hearing last August, and the Entertainment Software Association and various developers voluntarily said, well, we're going to go ahead and show the odds of winning something from a loot box from now on. Many countries have actually banned loot boxes because of the nature of relationship with gambling and potential risk. This is a loot box in action. For people who've worked in the problem gambling field know the anticipation of reward is a great aspect of the issue of problem gambling. Is that it's that anticipation, that excitement of reward. It's the visuals, it's the audio, it's everything combined, and thinking I could get something really cool out of this, and I'm spending a little bit of money and I could get a great reward out of it. And you could see, especially in we're not focused on kids so much on this webinar, but it is something that we do look at, especially when brains are developing, about the potential risk and impulse control issues that happen there. Research on loot boxes is early, but so far the research shows that paying for loot boxes is linked to problem gambling, and over 90% of gamers have opened a loot box. That latter study there, Brooks and Clark, was of adults. Now, skins. Skins are another thing that are within video games, and they're basically decorative. They're usually weapons. They could be clothing. They could be really anything else within a video game that is a decorative item within a video game that is often coveted. And these are 3 examples of them. As you can see, the top right one, there's some design on there. It looks kind of cool. It is a weapon. Down on the bottom there are two screenshots from basically gambling sites that you can gamble on skins to try to get these items. For those that wonder, why would you pay for something that's virtual like this? Well, it's really a cachet thing, especially among young people. If you think about like collecting Nikes, some people really like to collect Nikes. They like the coolest, greatest thing. It's similar to that in that they want something that might be rare. They might be something that you know, other people might look at and go, wow, that's cool that you have that thing. And so skins are something oftentimes that even though they're virtual, they have value to people within a video game. And even though they might not help somebody advance in the game. Skins research shows us that among gamblers, those who bet skins had higher rates of at-risk and problem gambling than those who did not. So these are among gamblers. So 23% versus 8%. That's a considerably higher rate. And they also have greater breadth of gambling involvement. So people who are gamblers or who gamble might more likely to have greater involvement in all kinds of types of games, including on betting skins. And there's these articles are also below for links for anybody who would like the slide deck. All right, our first polling question. Which are 3 emerging trends relevant to reducing gambling-related harm? How we doing on that, Robbie?
We've got about 60% have answered, so I'm figuring we'll keep it open about 20 more seconds.
Great.
And we'll see. Great job, everybody. And T minus 10 seconds. We've got 76%. Okay. Closing now.
It looks like we have one panelist that's unable to, or one participant that's not able to submit an answer. Chelsea.
Okay. All right, we'll check into it, Chelsea. Thank you.
All right, how'd they do, Robbie?
Well, we had 1% answered A.
Okay.
72% answered correctly, if I may say it, B. 11% answered C, and 11% answered D.
All right, I did try to make it a little bit tricky, just because we did show kiosks and talked about scratch it tickets. It is sports betting, loot boxes, and skins. I didn't say esports specifically because at this point we're actually including esports within sports betting entirely, although that's not in law yet. As you can see, sports betting was included on every one of those answers. So regardless of how you answered correctly. Sports betting is definitely at risk, and loot boxes and skins are something that is more and more looked at as a risk in reducing gambling-related harm. So now we're going to move into, now that we talked a little bit about these trends, and we could certainly talk for a much longer time and expand on why these trends are concerning and what is involved with them. But we're really focused on RG strategies for this webinar, and it's a quick one. So we're gonna dive right into defining RG and then talking about strategies in this new world of gambling. The Reno model was something that was developed back in 2004, and it basically sort of set a standard, a gold standard, if you will, around what responsible gambling involves. And so the Reno model, you can see here the definition, which I'll go ahead and read, is responsible gambling refers to policies and practices designed to prevent and reduce potential harms associated with gambling. These policies and practices often incorporate a diverse range of interventions designed to promote consumer protection, community and consumer awareness, and education and access to efficacious treatment. And this is really still very much a standard. It is pretty comprehensive in the sense that it looks at it across the spectrum from individual to policy, and we're gonna look at that more in a moment. The issue here with RG is that there's no federal funding for problem gambling services in our country. There's no federal funding for public service announcements, for discussion, for education, for really anything that really drives this conversation. And so the industry has been the one to drive the conversation for many, many years now. And that's really caused a lot of skepticism. Initially, when RG was starting, basically just a little over a decade ago in most jurisdictions, it really heightened a lot of skepticism. Well, what are your intents? Do you actually want to prevent problem gambling, or what are your roles here? It's kind of similar to how we look at Budweiser drink responsibly. The first word there is drink. It is very similar when we look at it from an industry perspective, is what is their motive behind what they're doing? And so really though, even though a lot of people's perspective is still this way, you're only doing this for good PR, is in the last 10 years or so, even in the last 3 or 4 years from what I've seen working with the industry, is that they really have stepped up their game. There's a lot of competition within the industry themselves to even, up their game and sort of have practices around, look, we have a responsible gambling plan and you don't. And it's sort of this kind of healthy competition that they have. And really there's a lot more of working with one another, partnerships and relationships with the problem gambling field, something that we certainly didn't have several years ago. I remember for those of you who are in the field, you probably also are aware of the animosity really between the industry and problem gambling field. Is there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of blame throwing in both directions, but probably more on, I say, on our side of things, on the problem gambling side of things. And industry is sort of, on for better or for worse, defensive in many ways over, well, we excuses either or, we're really trying, and they really were trying, and it just took a while to get going. But in the last few years, there's more verification, there's more certification, a lot more trainings, both with retailers and with employees, and a lot more positive attitude toward RG and working with the problem gambling field. But really it is, it's all of our responsibility. It is something as part of the continuum of care. And for those who recognize this, it's the continuum of care from the Institute of Medicine. It really focuses on health promotion all the way over on the other end of the wheel to the recovery. And so we look at RG, we're really looking at most of that continuum of care. We're looking at promotion, prevention, all the way into case identification, and then not treatment. RG should not have a place necessarily in treatment, although we could certainly discuss what that might look like. And then into recovery. So responsible gambling really covers most of the gamut of continuum of care. It's just how it's done and whether it is done in an evidence-based way. So what does that look like? Well, from a public health lens, this is the Thomas Frieden Health Pyramid. It's a framework for public health, the health impact pyramid. It, as you can see on the left-hand side over there, the arrow that goes down is increasing population impact. On the very bottom is the greatest impact. And over on the right it shows conversely the increased individual effort needed. So counseling and education is more costly and it does not have as much of a population-based impact, whereas public health policies and socioeconomic addressing has a greater public health impact and less individual effort needed. Having said that, all of these pieces are important. They're extremely important, especially because on the level of the bottom, I actually have it grayed out because there's not a whole lot, at least currently, that we can do about housing, poverty, education, and inequality in terms of the RG piece. Now, we certainly have a part in that, but it is something that is extremely difficult to address. And if we figured that out, I'm sure we would already figure that out by a society, housing, poverty, education, and inequality. So it is extremely important, but I have graded out just in the sense that these are probably areas that are not necessarily as practical for us to focus on in the responsible gambling world. Now, what are realistic areas for us to focus on are the areas of the pyramid that look into context. So in this sense, on the sort of bottom area of the pyramid, it shows changing the context to make an individual's default decision healthy. An example is fluoridation. So fluoridated water, it's basically, it's, as they say, it's in the water. It makes the default decision healthy. It focuses on developing healthy dental health, stronger enamel and teeth, and therefore, you know, healthy dental health often also equates into healthier lifestyles and healthy behaviors, or not healthy behaviors, but health later on. So an example in gambling world would be baking responsible gambling into a law. So having it in a place, by law, you need to place X percentage of funding into problem gambling. As I understand it, in Illinois now, you have a lot more funding. I believe it's $6.8 million to address it. It's a lot of money that kind of came quickly, and then infrastructure is really hard to develop with that. But baking into law and policies and strategic plans. And then there's long-lasting protective interventions. So point of sale tools, looking at age of 21 because of brain development, and also aligning yourselves with alcohol and tobacco laws, and then other safeguards in terms of protective interventions. So we consider that sort of an immunization. It might not be in the water per se, but it's something that people could do to help protect themselves. Then there's interventions, retailer training, player education, harm reduction, and exclusions, and counseling and education. So these are pieces that we can realistically focus on in our worlds, and we're going to really look at this from how this looks on a practical level in our 1 hour together. So knowing these, you know, we have clinicians on the line and really want to focus on areas that are not necessarily industry focused or based, or even necessarily from a legislative perspective, although that's certainly an area that we could look at. But here are some things that we might come into contact with as clinicians, as educators, and as human beings walking in the world. So these are point of sale tools, and the point of sale tools, we would consider these to be part of that protective interventions. And these are sort of in the middle of that pyramid. They do affect quite a big population. They're not necessarily, you know, making the default choice healthy, but they are something that is, when someone chooses to play or they come to play, these are some things that can really be helpful. So budgeting tools, so pre-commitment. What this looks like. This is an example on the right-hand side of the Play My Way budgeting pre-commitment tool at Massachusetts casinos. Having worked in Massachusetts and seeing the casinos, they baked this into their regulation around what casinos need to have, is a pre-commitment tool, the opportunity to voluntarily set your budget and check on your budget, and it sends reminders. 1 in 10 casino patrons have signed up. That seems like a low number, that's actually quite a very high number for people to voluntarily sign up for a pre-commitment tool like this. These are seen as relatively effective. Now, research in responsible gambling is not that well set up at this point. It's not that, you know, there's not a whole lot of agreement on what looks like a good study, but the studies are below here in these links, and people can take a look at them on their own time if you're interested in looking at those. But evidence-based research in RG is pretty new. Budgeting tools are an effective strategy, taking breaks. And informed player choice. There was a recent study that really showed that understanding payback percentages on games is really important. And this can be extrapolated into looking at payback percentages even with loot boxes. I think we have less control over the video game industry and what that looks like, but these are certainly opportunities for discussion and for advocacy. The jury is kind of out on this is pop-ups in terms of how effective pop-up windows are. Some people just get annoyed by them. I remember back in the day when, I don't know if anybody on this call had the Wii console, the WII, it was the video game console, and it used to say something like, hey, you've been playing for a while, why don't you go outside? And then, you know, click, click, just get out with stupid pop-up window, I want to play my game. These are, the jury's sort of out on these, time limit setting. And ID checks, we really don't know that yet, but it is very important. It's obviously in terms of looking at, you know, preventing people from gambling. They have to be effective ID checks. They have to be, you know, not where somebody could just click a button and say, I'm 18, I'm 21. What are ineffective and potentially even possibly harmful tools are enforced tools. So these are things that are not voluntary, and breaks in play, making you take a break in play, as doctrine shows to be creating even more craving kind of behavior, and they tend to kind of be ineffective and can be even counterproductive. So what does this mean for clinicians? If you're able to talk with your clients, or if you're an educator, it's being able just to share with folks that budgeting tools, thinking about setting a budget is important. Whether or not it's a formalized tool like Plan My Way, it doesn't need to be. It could certainly just be talking about setting a budget and checking in with yourself about how much you're spending and what the percentage you said you were going to spend is, taking breaks, and then thinking about informed player choice so that they can understand what it is that they're getting involved with before they get involved with it. All right, I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse here just to throw this in here because I know people on this call are smart. So here's a question before we go into it. Harm reduction methods, although considered effective, should not be used for people who may be at risk for gambling problems.
Okay, people are answering quickly, Julie. Or a little bit quicker than last time anyways. We're almost at, yeah, we're at 50% now, so.
Great.
Okay, we're about at 76%. So let's, I'll leave it open 10, 15 more seconds. Everybody's doing well here. Five more seconds. We've got someone else. Got some people having a little bit of difficulty with the polling questions, but I'll take a look at that, guys. Don't worry. Okay, Julie, we have 89% answered false, which is correct.
All right, and this could be an area where we get into the discussion portion of this webinar. I'd like to hear from the 11% if they think that these should not be used. It is still an area, I think, of a little bit of controversy. But, you know, I think more and more people are looking at harm reduction among people that might be at risk. Dr. Tim Fong out of the UCLA Gambling Studies program says, the spirit of harm reduction holds a certain appeal for pathological gamblers. Many gamblers are impulsive and hold high expectations for themselves, so that any ongoing struggles to achieve total quote unquote sobriety may be interpreted as yet another failure. This is hard for those that promote that sort of abstinence-based, that once an addict, always an addict kind of mentality. You know, it could be an individualistic piece as well. We know people that we have worked with that if they do choose to go and gamble, they're not going to be able to gamble responsibly. So this is certainly an area of caution and of care. The question was for people at risk of gambling problems, not necessarily people who already have a gambling disorder, but these are ways that we can sort of look at harm reduction approaches among people who are already in these settings and already possibly at greater risk. This is an example of a program that is a harm reduction approach. It's called GameSense. It came out of the British Columbia Lottery Corporation, and it is something that even though it's industry sort of developed, it is something that has been taken on by a lot of government agencies, or at least interested in it. The Connecticut Lottery Corporation has incorporated GameSense. The Massachusetts Gaming Commission has mandated that GameSense is in all of its casinos. And in my work in Massachusetts, we operated the GameSense program and found that, interestingly enough, people who are going to play bets at casinos don't want to have a counseling center within the casino. I know that's shocking. But the law really baked in the Massachusetts Expanded Gambling Act of 2011, it said that there had to be sort of a counseling center within the casinos. I think for those who are familiar with the casino setting, and those of you, anybody who's actually had a gambling related booth at a fair or another event, is people take a very wide circle around those areas. They don't want to be affiliated with them. There's a certain set of stigma around it. There's, well, even if you call it prevention or problem gambling or healthy gambling, they still kind of look at it as, oh, well, I don't have a gambling problem. I don't have any need for this. And so GameSense, what it did is sort of, it takes down the guard, and it's a friendly set of faces. So this is Edgardo. He's a GameSense advisor at one of the casinos in Massachusetts. And he really focuses, the GameSense advisors are people. They focus on, hey, how you doing today? Developing a relationship, and really trying to take that next step in assessing someone where they're at. It's almost like motivational interviewing. In fact, in their training, they learn about motivational interviewing. But what they do is they develop that relationship. They gauge where people are at. If they're having fun, they encourage them to have more fun. Hey, what do you think about joining up for this program where you can take breaks? How do you feel about, setting limits on the amount of time you said? Well, I noticed that you said you wanted to leave here at 5. I just want to come over and remind you it's 5. Those kind of things where they're not butting in per se, but they're just sort of there to be a guide and help to people that would like it. So this is an alternative to an abstinence-based program. It is seeing people where they're at, physically seeing people where they're at. And it's a method that just knows that people are already engaged in a behavior that could present them at risk. They're already in a casino, so let's figure out how to help them when they're there. Now, in all practical purposes, we don't know if Illinois can incorporate this, but it is something that looked at is seeing, can someone provide that sort of help when someone's there? Is there a way, I don't know, perhaps in Illinois to not necessarily even incorporate GameSense, but have sort of advisors or helps for people to look at an alternative to an abstinence-based approach. Now, then getting further on into it is looking at, I just got a notification internet connection is unstable. I'm hoping that we're all on the same slide. It's voluntary self-exclusion. Confirm. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I got you, Julie. I can hear you.
Okay, great. I just want to confirm. I just got a notification that my internet was unstable, so I want to make sure that we're still all here.
And we got a note from another participant that they can hear us, so I think we're good.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So voluntary self-exclusion is another area which can really help limit that temptation. It is sort of a short-term effective approach around how to help people with excluding and having that temptation on visiting a casino itself, or maybe even an online gambling method. DraftKings and FanDuel both have voluntary self-exclusion options. There's certainly workarounds to all these things in which people, then put an extra couple of initials in their name or something else to get around it if they're tempted. But it is one of those effective methods that has been shown to help reduce that temptation and help people. Now, this should include info and referral for additional supports and not being on its own. Congratulations, you just excluded. Now, good luck, sucks to be you, right? So it should always include some kind of assistance for additional supports. And it should include the removal of marketing promotion of the either the casino or the menu or whatever the operator is, so that that person does not have that temptation even to go to another operator. And these are interventions on that pyramid. And then there are policies. So policies are the most effective approach. Policies are the hardest to implement, but they are something that you really want to look at in terms of all of the operations, to have those in place before they get set up, ideally. Obviously, now you have a law that's in place in Illinois, but you are still constituents, and even on your own time, if you choose to, there are ways to sort of still advocate for interventions for proper models of protection for players. So I also want to draw attention to the National Council on Problem Gambling, because the National Council on Problem Gambling has a safer sports betting initiative, which it was helpful for those who already have programs in place as well. The goal really is to build on regulations, to recommend principles and practices, to study further what gambling behavior looks like. The ENGAGE study is the National Gambling Attitudes and Gambling Behaviors study that was done in 2019, which I referenced earlier, around the 11% of esports. and developing the partnerships with operators, with leagues, even high schools and higher education. One thing that we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks is I'm on the board of the National Council on Problem Gambling. We're going to be talking with the NCAA around setting up a project for prevention for student athletes, something that is very near and dear to my heart because student athletes are much more at risk of gambling problems. And particularly, and I know in Illinois, you have some Division I university, you have all kinds of universities in Illinois, and a lot of people are very high profile who attend these universities, and they're more vulnerable themselves to developing gambling problems. So developing those partnerships is really critical for us to also then create ads that people can use and use nationwide is important, especially if you don't have the infrastructure for that. And then advocating. So interestingly, of the 2/3 of states that passed sports betting in the last 18 months, only 2/3 of them actually, only 2/3 of states have included dedicated responsible gambling policies and practices. We were hoping for more, and of those 2/3 of states, not all of them have incorporated what the resolutions of and recommendations of the National Council on Problem Gambling have recommended, but there's always a start. With no federal funding, it's a challenge. All right, question 3. Which of the following responsible gambling strategies is likely to have the greatest overall public health impact?
Okay, we're launched. Oh, great, we've got people voting pretty quickly on this one as well. I'll keep you posted here, but we're at 71%, so we'll wait maybe 30 more seconds. Okay, 5 more seconds. We're at 80%, but we've been here for quite some time. So I'm going to go ahead and close. But Julie, we had 29% answer A, no one answered B, 59% answered C, the correct answer, and 12% answered D.
Right. All right, so the answer is C, policy, and no policy is effective without actually following through with policy and having adequate regulation. We can put all the policies we want in place, but without adequate enforcement of the policy, then we just don't have a whole lot. But yes, when we look at that pyramid that we looked at earlier, policy is definitely more of that population-based approach. It is not as necessarily, it's something that we can tangibly affect ourselves. And so it definitely takes a lot of community, a lot of partnership to be able to do that. But yes, policy has that greatest level of impact. In terms of looking at health impacts, certainly voluntary self-exclusion is a part of that. Counseling is a huge, great, important part of it. And it is also something that is not necessarily the overall public health impact. And then media campaigns are wonderful, but they're not that effective on their own. I mean, we've all seen how many commercials have we seen about people not texting and driving, and how many people are texting and driving. So I think that just speaks for itself. These are some resources that I also want to include because we have such a very short time, and this is an RG 101. It's not a deep dive into what are you doing and how can we maybe provide some help. This is more of an overall kind of picture, but these are some hopefully helpful resources for you to be able to take as you go in your world. One of the things that I like is the National Council on Problem Gambling has some responsible gambling resources that really looks at some of the policies and practices that could be in place. But I find the Gambling Resource Exchange of Ontario is phenomenal in terms of the resources that they have, public health resources, really practical perspectives on, exchanging research for practical language. And so when you go look at a research study, it actually just helps to translate that research study and really show you what it looks like in common language. Change the Game Ohio is wonderful. It is a parent-based prevention resources. It shows a little bit more about loot boxes that we talked about earlier, describes them, talks about talking with kids about gaming and gambling. So it's presented very well visually. I think you'll find that helpful if you have a desire to look at those resources. And Game Quitters is for video game addiction specifically. And a fellow by the name of Cam Adair started it, and he is a person who is in recovery for his gaming addiction. And he developed it because there was nothing out there. And Game Quitters is a phenomenal resource with plenty of forums for questions and answers, a lot of videos. He continues to develop videos. He recommends a 60-day detox, if you will, around stopping gaming and then seeing where you're at with that. Sort of, again, going back to that motivational interviewing concept, is some people need to keep stopped, and some people can really effectively work that harm reduction approach. But I highly recommend Game Quitters as well if you're interested more in that esports addiction, video game addiction concept. So we are at 10 minutes now to time. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to, first of all, just say thank you for your time. I hope in some capacity this has been helpful for you. I know these one-on-one kind of, these 101 kind of things can kind of tend to seem really, really broad brush and maybe not so practical, but I'm hoping that you did get something out of this webinar. And I'd really like to open it up to questions, comments, and arguments, and see what's out there, what's on your mind.
Yeah, guys, if you have any questions or comments, what I can do is I can open it up and perhaps maybe either allow you to speak if you want to chat me, or we can just open up the whole thing here and see what we sound like anyways. I do have a question here. Oh, okay. Yeah, I've got that. We have someone who would like the PowerPoint email to them, and we will do that for you. But let me go in here.
Yep, I got that for you, Rodney.
Oh, did you? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank
cool.
you.
All right.
All right, what else? What else is on your mind besides maybe lunch or going to the bathroom before your next client?
Okay, we've got a question, I think, coming here. So this is from Ellen Gordon, and she asked, what about restaurants, delis now offering gambling like slots? Julie, to give you a little, and you may already know this, but with Illinois, okay, yeah. Okay, so you know about the gambling machines, right?
Oh yeah,
we have more than Nevada. So what? I mean, what's your recommendations here? Ellen's asking, what about restaurants, delis? Because I tell you, everywhere I've gone to, there are these standalone gambling machines. I was getting my shoes taken care of a few months ago, and at the place I've gone to in the Loop there forever, and I look up and there was a new gambling machine there. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really hard to avoid that temptation when you have something that's literally right around the corner from your house. Particularly women are more at risk because women are more likely to go into a deli than they are go to a casino, right? I mean, it's less stigma. They can go out and say, well, I'm getting milk and eggs, and they may just slip into a deli. And so I think just in terms of keeping it on our radar is really important. I think knowing groups that might be at more risk is important. And just talking with people about this, that these are gambling. And I think people still don't see it. Having been in Oregon for many years, and then I went to Massachusetts, came back to Oregon, it's like it just kind of hits you in the face if you're in it. But if you're not in it, it certainly doesn't hit you in the face. You don't consider it as casinos when they essentially are mini casinos just around every corner, right? And so I think just that awareness piece is critical. Talking with the operators, if that's a possibility, and saying, I mean, I've had poor luck with this. I'll just be frank with you, and talking with the individual, because they're usually franchisees, right? When you go in and you talk with them, you're like, hey, how's it going? Would you be willing to put these things here? If it's not regulated, there's less likely of a chance, and you may find a little bit more luck with certain operators. We've actually done in the past, which we had more success with, is having a responsible gambling champion kind of award for those operators who are willing to put out even something like that says take a break. We have Problem Gamblers Awareness Day in Oregon, this every September 29th, and encourage operators to also then encourage their patrons to take a break for a day. And if you're having a hard time taking a break, you know what, there's help available. And so making that relationship with the operators in a way that is promoting health as opposed to, hey, can you, talk to these people when they're having gambling problems, that would be something that would be typically left up to the regulator in terms of providing adequate training for their employees, because employees know this is going on. A lot of times they're the people on the ground, right? And they're seeing somebody sitting in a seat for 6-8 hours, and that's their seat, and they don't want to give it up, and it's a Tuesday. So they know stuff that's going on. So even helping train them on just, just being a resource, not necessarily intervening, but just being a resource and having the knowledge about what tools are available for problem gambling services. So I don't know, Ellen, if that gets at what you're asking, if you have any other comments on that.
Yes, she did. And I like that, Julie, what you said, not intervening, but just being a resource. I think something's better than nothing, right? And I think that approach might, but Ellen replied, owners see no harm in it because it gets them extra money with no work. So they're getting those revenues. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Ellen. And that's where I find it, it depends on the owner. It depends on, how comfortable they are with this area and how willing they are to kind of have that conversation. And I think the employees themselves are more likely to be that resource just because they're not invested in necessarily in, getting that extra 100K, right, from the slots. But it's certainly, we'd encourage at the higher level of being able to provide those trainings and require them for operators.
Great. And we have a question from our own prevention coordinator out of North Carolina.
Oh, Allison.
My colleague, and she, by the way, she says great job. But what advice, Allison asked, what advice do you have for prevention coordinators, maybe, more of a general approach there, and how do we get started with informing our communities of new gambling opportunities?
Well, that's a great question, Allison, and thank you for being here because you're an expert. I might just throw this back at you as a prevention coordinator because I think you have some ideas. I'll throw mine in after you go, though. I'm going to put you on the spot. How about that? Are we allowed to do that?
Oh, no, you're fine. I'm trying to find Allison here.
All right. While you're finding her,
sure.
Allison, this is more for clinicians, obviously, but for prevention coordinators, we have our work cut out for us. I think our main issue is talking with parents. Kids and getting into schools is more and more difficult. It's you all have a great program as you're able to introduce Stack Deck in North Carolina, which is phenomenal. It's a high school curriculum for those that are unfamiliar, and it's evidence-based. But most schools around the country don't have that opportunity. They don't necessarily have the funding or the buy-in from the schools themselves to participate. So I would say talking with parents, that's where I go back to Change the Game Ohio. I think it's really critical in the prevention world for us to really communicate with those in the know who are parents that care about their kids that may not even know this is going on right beneath their nose. And so that's an area where I think this is really important. We look at loot boxes, skins, esports, betting, all this stuff that parents are very often unfamiliar with.
Nice. And Allison, I've opened you up if you're on.
I am. Hey, Julie.
There you go.
Hey.
I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think if we look at the socio-ecological model of prevention and we look at risk factors and protective factors and each of those different levels from, individual to community, we figure out, the overall well-being of communities, when we're preventing or reducing harm in the area of problem gambling, we're also assisting with the overall well-being of the individual. So we're, working towards, a greater goal there. But I would definitely think that if we have limited resources, getting into schools and then figuring out how we get to parents is key.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, you, Allison. Very good. So we've got a couple more minutes. Do we have any other questions while we have Julie and Allison?
Yeah.
Right?
I did notice a comment from Ellen real quick here. She says, why, do you have any idea why they're naming these standalone gambling places with women's name like Stella, Betty, etc.? Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that piece around women, and it's really targeting women. We're being targeted in with alcohol advertising more than ever, with even marijuana advertising, and certainly gambling, and women and slots, especially middle-aged and up. It puts people at risk, and with names like Stella and Betty, it's very inviting.
Yes, it is. And you could look at it that way. It's their job. And I know that because my wife is a marketer, not in this industry, but another one. So, absolutely. So we have one more minute. If someone wants to creep a quick question in.
I think we just creep them their minute back is what I think.
There
Robbie.
Yes.
They've been awesome. You
Yeah.
guys have been very interactive and very much appreciate it.
And very good questions. Well, while we're waiting, I do want to let you know that this webinar has been recorded, and you can access the recording on, you got it, we know the feeling.org. So you can access all our past webinars on our website. And I would like, I guess, to take this quick moment to thank Julie Hynes for her time and for the great information. I wanted to slide a question in about the prevention programs for athletes that you're going to be, I'm very curious, with the NCAA. Julie, and I'm sure that sounds like some exciting stuff, and I look forward to hearing from you about what you guys are doing with student athletes in those prevention programs. So, but yes, yeah. Well, hey, Julie, thank you very much. And that brings us to our hour. And again, everybody, I'll take a look at these chats, and you can get this recorded version off weknowthefeeling.org. Everybody have a great day, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone.